Take it away.
Fantastic. Well, welcome everybody. The first thing I'd actually like to ask you a quick question. If you can put it in chat, or I think there's a chat function here. If you could let me know what's your role at your nonprofit, or if you're a consultant, you can tell me that. And what big question is on your mind right now? So I'll give you a moment to kind of pop that into chat. And I'm asking this because, I think most of us come interested in strategic planning or some better way of strategic planning because we have decisions to make. We have questions that we're asking. We're looking for a path forward. Somebody once said, we have no strategic plan, we're rudderless. Your strategy can be your direction. So I'd love to know, what is that question you have right now about your direction, and what is your role at your nonprofit?
And just so you know, Sarah, they're coming through the questions because that's the way they can interact with us. So excellent. They're filing in.
Awesome. Okay, great. Some executive directors, volunteer engagement. Fantastic. Wonderful. Great answers. How can we approach strategic planning in a way that includes, engages, and excites the entire staff? So important. Okay, here's your role. Volunteer engagement in an agency, and also leading a DOVIA. I don't even know what that is, but I'd love to know. Community engagement manager, consultant. How do you get a board engaged? Questions about engagement. I love that. We're definitely going to be talking about that today. I would love this process to be simple and straightforward. Yes, please, let's not have it take a year just to make a plan. And it also shouldn't cost $20,000. Great, consultants. Is there a better way to do our planning? I sure hope so. I hope I'm going to give you that today. Raising more money, absolutely. Future fundraising. Fantastic, great comments here. So I'll just tell you, I am a nonprofit consultant. I have been a marketer for nonprofits, but I originally started as an executive director. Something has just changed on my screen. What has happened? Sharing my screen. Hold on.
What?
There we go.
There okay. You are. Whew.
Yeah. Oh, computers. And so I come actually from originally being a program director and executive director. So I got my start in nonprofits, circled out, and then have circled back in. When I was working in nonprofits as executive director and program director, it was mostly in the autism and education space. So if there's any developmental disabilities or educators out there, that's where I got my start. So it is true that the internet has given us big data, and with the two of those things, our world has changed, and we do need an updated model for strategic planning. Fortunately, I've got two pieces of good news. The same people who created the internet have basically given us most of the answers about how to plan for this new world where things evolve much faster than they used to. But also this new way of planning is actually just better than the old way was, because it can give us so much more. And that's why I want to start by talking about success and what more means. So, right, we all want to accomplish more. We have huge goals at our nonprofits. And in an ideal world, our strategies would just kind of reach out, take us by the hand, and show us the way to success for our organizations. Our traditional strategic plans don't exactly do that, and oftentimes they actually are like an extra chore and not a huge help to our organization. And rarely do our traditional strategic plans give us a detailed roadmap, starting from where we are right now. How do we take that first step? And then how do they guide us into the future, even when times are hard? Because challenges are going to come up. There are going to be lows. That is an inevitable part of the growth process. So can our plans help us through those hard times? And finally, I'd like to ask our plans not just to take us to success in delivering our mission, but a place where we also feel fulfilled in our own lives as we lead our nonprofit, so that we are not overworked, so that we have a little extra time to spend with our families, to do what we feel passionate about, because that makes us better people, it makes us better leaders, it makes us better change makers, and it makes us happier. So that's why I'm here today, because I want you to have this kind of experience to getting success, to what I call a thriving nonprofit, meaning that you can do the mission that you are out there to achieve, and it doesn't have to be quite so hard. It shouldn't be overwhelming. It shouldn't feel chaotic. You should feel like you have a rock solid way to move forward. And I find that success has basically 3 components. You have to iterate. You see here, you have to just try. No matter where you start from, you can start from nothing, you can start from having a lot. But if you keep iterating, if you keep improving and trying again, you can get to success. The difference with iteration, when you iterate, it means that when you fail, that is one more step towards success. People who don't iterate, failure is an end, not a step forward. So iteration is so important. Being intentional. When personally, this is about your own capacity to move forward. You have to take the right intentional steps forward. And being specific about where you're going. And I'm going to tell you a little story about how important it is to be specific. So basically, for years, running nonprofits, I told you I've been an executive director, program director, starting in around 2004. I always knew about iteration. I knew that staying in the battle was half the game. Staying in the game was half of the battle. But I survived, and I continued on when other people didn't, but I never thought that I was at that place of being really successful. And then about 3 years ago, I took on intention. And for me, this had to start with getting up the courage to leave my husband. I had a 3-year-old son. My son was 3 at the time. And I needed to get really intentional about making a future that I wanted, which included a comfortable lifestyle. We were very, very poor. And so I needed that stability to not be worrying all the time. I wanted to provide an amazing education for my son, like I had growing up. And I was in my 30s with 0 retirement savings and nothing in the bank. So I needed to be able to retire someday. And I am a heart-driven person, probably like most of you, because pretty much everybody who works in a nonprofit or with nonprofits is driven by their heart. And so I needed my work to be fulfilling. And I knew that for me, that had to do with helping nonprofits make a bigger impact. And then I learned about getting specific. And I had a really lucky moment. And that came because I was in the middle of divorce mediation. Talk about it's pretty positive view. So yay, I'm in divorce mediation. And I was sent home with an assignment to write down this parenting schedule, how I would share my time with my son, with my ex. And in that same day, I had already enrolled in kind of a mastermind community for business owners. And we had a session that day talking about how you cannot do every part of a business on your own and be profitable and sustainable. You have to, for your time, take on the pieces that you are incredible at and delegate the other pieces off to other people, or you will never be sustainable and you will never be profitable. So I had taken my son's schedule, and I had already added up the hours. I wanted to make sure that he would have basically equal time with his father and his mother. So I switched those hours around, and I said, well, if I want to spend every hour that I have with my son truly present with him, how many hours do I have left in the week to work and grow this business? And it came out at 28.5 hours per week to work. That's not a lot. That's not the option to, oh, I'll just work harder, I'll just work more, like so many people in businesses do, so many people in nonprofits do. And so I said, okay, well, how much money do I really have to make? So I added up the expenses. What were my living expenses? What were my son's expenses related to education, summer camp, everything that takes to raise a child? Because while I was sharing my time with my ex, I was financially a single mother. And finally, how much did I have to put into retirement to catch up and retire at a reasonable age? And it came out larger than I expected. And I came out with this new hyper-specific direction about where I needed to go. And that was, I needed to create a business that was personally fulfilling, which meant providing a service that was truly significant and positive impact for nonprofits. I needed that business to generate a personal income for me of $120,000 a year. And I couldn't work more than 28 hours a week to make this happen. So it's 3 years later, I've paid off my debts. I actually had to start my business $18,000 in debt. And I have what I want. My son is going to the school that I wanted him to go to. And where people often are really amazed is I don't work on Fridays, which really allows me to breathe and be a full person. And people ask me how I got there. So that's what I'm going to share with you. That's my son. This is just after a couple months after I got separated, and he's super excited to show us the food in his mouth. So how did I get there? I told you I was in a business mastermind, and I started really learning about these frameworks that for-profit businesses are using to run. They are strategic frameworks that not only give you a plan, but give you a way of executing your plan and essentially leveling up year after year, month after month to grow a business. So I started using some of these frameworks, and I was piecing them together for my own business. And at the time, I was mostly working with clients on marketing, nonprofit clients on marketing. But I've always been very transparent. It's one of our core values at PivotGround, that we believe that being transparent and collaborative is kind of one of our core ways of being successful. And so I shared with my clients what I was doing and started making some suggestions here and there. And one client in particular asked if I would come and spend several days training their team in some of these frameworks that I was doing. So I did that. It was an amazing experience for both me and the team, and completely shifted the way this organization was able to work. And I fell in love with doing that. But I still had a few issues. So I was piecing together multiple frameworks. And as I started to teach this to clients, as they were requesting it, there were a few elements of for-profit frameworks that just wouldn't work in a nonprofit, or that were just missing, because nonprofits are different than for-profits. Nonprofits have some extra challenges that they need to face. So I combined those frameworks and I built the extra tools, and I've spent the last year teaching clients how to implement this framework, which I call the impact method. It has 3 core components: organize, optimize, and thrive. And I just want to highlight these components for a second. These are just like the elements of success. Organize is about strategy, thrive is about iteration, and optimize is about your capacity. It's the same kind of thing as having intention, but having intention throughout an entire organization is really about capacity. And the reason why having a strategic framework is so much better than just a strategy is these 3 pieces all feed each other. And let me just see if I can draw on here, if my technology will work for me. So when you have a when you're iterating, so when you're trying things, reviewing and coming back, you have the opportunity to have a better strategy because you're learning each time you iterate. And you have the opportunity to increase your capacity, partly just because you're flexing a muscle. Each time you do a rep, you get better at doing it. So when you iterate, you get better strategy and better capacity. At the same time, when you have a really clearly written out strategy that takes you from what you're going to do tomorrow through to how that's going to impact your mission, a better strategy makes each iteration easier and better. That does not look like an arrow. That should look like, still doesn't look like an arrow. So when you, so we just imagine an arrow going this way. No, still won't do it for me. Come on, technology. So when you have a well-written strategy, you can iterate better. I'm going to try one more time here. There we go. That's an arrow. When you have a great strategy, you can know exactly how and when to build your capacity. And then when you have great capacity, and I know this is starting to look crazy, but it should look kind of crazy, each iteration you do more, and thus your iteration more. And when you have great optimized capacity, your strategy is more robust. So this should start to look crazy because this is the exponential impact that a strategic framework is going to give you that a strategy or a traditional strategic plan never could. And in addition, it's going to allow you to survive the digital age. So I'm going to break down these pieces for you. And I'm going to start with Thrive. We're going to kind of work backwards. Thrive is about iteration. Iteration, as I've said, is really key. It's important to know that iteration isn't about just working and working and working and staying in the game, like I said I had originally learned. The best kind of iteration is about taking a moment to take some action and then stop for a moment and really look at what you did and then make a new plan based on what you know. So basically, an iterative cycle has 3 phases. There's always a moment where you plan, so planning phase. There's always an action phase where you're taking action, you're just going. You're going to stick to your plan, though. You're not just going to randomly go. And there's always a review phase. So the secret to iteration means you take action, but you review what worked, what didn't work, and then you incorporate what you learned into the next version of your plan. So in the impact method, we do a 60-day cycle. So many for-profit corporations plan quarterly. You could do that. But in the impact method, we have found that planning for just 60 days is much easier and more effective than planning for 90 days. So we make an initial plan. We do that. Sometimes it's, we think about we're doing annual planning, but that's not the same. An annual planning session is not the same as a 1-year plan. And I'm going to talk about those plans in a second. So we get initial plan in place, initial strategy. We take everything from that strategy that we're ready to do now, and we say, okay, what are we going to do in the next 60 days? But there's one step further, right? So iteration is the key. So we're not just going to iterate once. We're going to have some sub-iterations, and we call those sprints. I didn't make up the term. It comes from those people who make the internet. You can look up agile and Scrum. So basically, within this 60-day cycle, we're going to do 4 mini cycles, which we call sprints. So we take our 60-day plan, and then we divide what we were going to do in those 60 days into 2-week sprints. You can do 1 week sprints, you can do 3 week sprints. In the impact method, we do 2 week sprints because we found 1 week is too short to provide enough flexibility for the natural disorder of life. And 3 weeks is just a little too long. So we really keep it to a concise 2 weeks. So what is our review and planning? What are our review and planning steps? So we make our initial plan and we sprint for 2 weeks. And then we have what we call a sprint planning and review meeting. These meetings take, audio went down, it's back up, excellent. So a sprint planning and review meeting, so that's covering 2 weeks. We spend about an hour and a half with our key leadership and we review what happened in those 2 weeks. Is there anything we need to stop? Is there anything we need to start? Is there anything we need to change? Is there something we completely left out of our plan because we're only human that we need to now add in and account for? Then when we reach the end of our 60-day cycle, we do a larger planning and review meeting. We call it a cycle planning meeting. We usually spend 3 to 5 hours doing this every 60 days. We review the cycle. Again, we think about what we've learned, what we need to stop or start doing, and then we look at our strategy and we say, okay, what are we ready to do now on our strategy? And we take a moment to iterate on our strategy itself. We're now 2 months farther into the future. We've learned some lessons, and usually we can build out a few more pieces on our larger strategy. So that is the Thrive component of our strategic framework. And this is, I love the Thrive piece because this is where the magic happens. This is where we implement everything. And this is where all this exponential impact of doing all 3 of these phases together really happens, because it's each time we do this review and planning phase, we're also iterating on the other 2 elements of the impact method, or of just achieving success through a strategic framework. So let's talk about Optimize. Optimize is all about capacity. And I love talking about capacity because this is what so many nonprofits are missing, but the problem might not be what you think. Most people think that their biggest capacity challenge, many nonprofits think that their biggest capacity challenge is that they don't have enough money. But I'm going to tell you that that is not your #1 challenge. So here we are in our nonprofits. Often we're wearing too many hats. We're always busy. As executive directors especially, everything on our to-do list is both important and urgent. And getting to a point of success where for you and your nonprofit that you both feel like you're thriving, that you're not overwhelmed, that is going to require increasing your capacity. And so if it's not money, where is the bulk of the capacity need in your organization? So where it is in its people. And this is one area where nonprofits are really different from for-profit organizations. Nonprofits have more people. There is no small business out there that has to deal with a board of directors. And no small business out there has to have mandated essentially 2 different, completely different products and services and audiences, meaning nonprofits always have a fundraising component and they have some sort of mission, some sort of service delivery component. So that's like 2 businesses in one right there. So even the smallest nonprofit has many more people in it than a for-profit organization. And this is great news because people are amazing and they can do incredible amounts of things if you get them organized together. So the secret to really tapping in to your untapped capacity right now is about optimizing the capacity of your people. And then there's other steps we can take to optimize other types of capacity, like how much money you have, how much expertise you have. And we'll talk about those briefly, but I'm going to focus on people for a moment. And if you want to have Fridays off or whatever your equivalent is, then what we need to do is not just increase capacity, but we want to scale capacity. So I just want to take a moment, and we have a question. Questions come from the reference of planning and doing SPs that sprints with nonprofits. I will try to take questions at the end. It's a little hard for me to monitor them all here, but I will save time for your questions. Sorry, scaling capacity versus growing capacity. When we grow capacity, what we're talking about is adding more, right? We add more people, we add more money, maybe we're adding more space, maybe we're adding more tools, maybe we're adding more resources. But with all of this growth, with all of this adding, we end up increasing the amount that we have to manage. And so we've just essentially made a bigger monster. Not that your nonprofit is a monster. But what we really want to do is focus on scaling capacity. Scaling capacity means increasing your ability to do more with a set amount of resources. So do more with the money you already have. Do more with the time and people you already have. Or if you're in the situation right now where people are burned out and overwhelmed, it might just mean figuring out how to do what you're doing now while reducing the number of hours your nonprofit the number of hours that the people in your nonprofit are working and the effort that it takes them to complete their work. So how do we do this? How do we scale capacity? There's a lot to scaling capacity, but I'm going to focus mostly right now on how to really scale the people power in your organization. And we have a number of tools that can help you do this in the impact method, but the primary one is called the Nonprofit Blueprint. And we have this template available as a download. I'm going to give you at the end links to that template. So this tool, it's basically a chart, and it looks like a traditional org chart, except it is not about the people in your organization. That's right, it's not about the people. It's about the functions that make your organization run. So the thing about people is we can't actually manage people. And if we try to manage people or control people, we find that we fall apart and become overwhelmed pretty quickly. But if we manage the functions in our nonprofit, if we really understand what those are and lay them out in an organized and clear structure, then people have this amazing ability. They will self-organize and self-manage around the structure that we create. It's like putting a trellis out there to allow our human capacity to grow on and get all aligned in the same direction. So once we have this structure of all the functions in place, then it enables us to truly delegate the ownership of certain functions and the outcomes that those functions produce to people in our organization. So that's the core tool that we use for optimizing people capacity in your nonprofit. Also related to optimizing people capacity, the next thing we like to do is invite each person who owns a function in your organization to use a modern internet term, hack that function to really maximize its potential. And we have a tool that we've created called the Accountability Optimizer that helps people do that. Another area where we can optimize people capacity is through mission and vision work. And this is something that's been traditionally lumped into strategic planning and our strategy, but really your mission and your vision around where you're going, getting that really clear and concise and meaningful is a capacity building tool because it's about alignment. And when we get people aligned, they all start moving in the same direction, and then we get momentum, and that's crucial. Another way we can get capacity for moving forward, right? So here we're talking about capacity, right? You say like, we're here for strategy. Capacity is your ability to execute on strategy. So it's critical that you focus on capacity as much as you focus on strategy. It's your ability to do it. So that's why I'm spending so much time on it. defining your core values. It's so important. Your core values are the set of guiding beliefs that you operate within. So for example, if your nonprofit is there to to help the poor, you might believe that it's okay to steal from the rich to give to the poor, like Robin Hood. Or you might have a core value that stealing is wrong no matter what. And so if you have those two different beliefs, the way you fulfill your mission, you might have the same mission, but the way you fulfill that mission is going to be different. So there's three main reasons why your core values are so important. The first reason is it's an alignment tool, again, just like your mission and vision. You can use it as a guide for hiring people. Hire people who already share your core values. You can use it as a tool for firing people. And when I say hiring people, not just hiring staff, but bringing on volunteers, board members, every aspect of your team of constituents, even donors. If you seek donors who share your core values, you will have easier, longer, better relationships with them. Another thing about core values is they help you delegate, right? Core values help you delegate because you have a set of ways in which you operate. So if you know, well, we believe it's okay to steal from the rich and give to the poor, when Johnny on your team has a question, well, should I just kind of cheat the system or should we kind of do it this other way? Johnny doesn't need to ask the executive director. Johnny knows that the answer is in the core values, and as long as he's operating within those core values, he's going in the same direction with everybody else. And so it helps people maintain ownership of their tasks, and so it makes it easier for you to delegate because people have a guide for the parameters which they need to operate in. We have a core value, as I shared earlier, of transparency. We say transparency and collaboration are the cornerstones of our success. And many times we have used this as a guide. Do we share something? Do we share an internal document? Do we share a bunch of resources with people? Do we share when we have failed or we have made a mistake? Those questions come up in all of the jobs of our team members here at PivotGround. And basically, we know the answer is yes, we share, because we believe in transparency. So nobody has to ask me as the leader really about whether or not we would share or hold a secret. So that's the second thing about core values. The third thing about core values, this is why core values are so important, is core values are the starting point for your organization's brand. Not your logo, not your website, nothing about how you look. The start of your brand has to do with your core values, because your core values operate the set of guiding principles that you operate under. That is your MO, your modus operandum. Your MO, the way you conduct yourself, is directly related to the way people perceive you. And branding is all about how people perceive you. So I love something that does triple, quadruple duty, so I'm definitely in favor of core values. Other ways to increase your capacity, not relating to people specifically, leveraging better data. We have another great tool on our site. I'm not sure if we included it in the list of resources on the link I'm going to give to you, but you can certainly find it in your blog. We have a great template for not just budgeting really, but forecasting and using data in new ways. There's so much data on the internet. I don't have time to go into it today, but using data is a great way to optimize capacity, and also really thinking about how you spend money and when you invest in expertise. Expertise is capacity. People who are experts can see a future that you can't. They can see around corners that you can't see around, and they can help with speed. And oftentimes I think at nonprofits, we think that we don't need speed, but we do. We really need to be able to move quickly. We waste so much time and money when we aren't able to move fast. So that is the second component of our strategic framework. Our third component is organize. And this is really when we come to probably the piece of strategic planning, right? So we are doing so much more with a strategic framework. I almost like to think of it as an operating framework. We're going to run on this. We're going to be looking at these things every 2 weeks, every 60 days. These are not going on a shelf. This is our lifeline to every step forward we take, and knowing that we are on the right path and knowing if we have stepped off the path. That's really critical. So the strategy part. Now I'm going to talk about this a bit. This is how we actually write our written strategy part in the impact method, and we are providing for you, we've just made a brand new resource just for this webinar of exactly how to write your goals and start to build out your strategy. So we actually we break strategies into 2 parts. The first part we call an impact strategy. This is where we really lay out your goals. Just going to put that there. And then the second part we call our continuous, we'll see if I spelled that right, action plan, or we call it CAP for short. And this is where the rubber meets the road. So your continuous action plan is going to be what exactly are you doing in the next 60 days? And of those things, which things are you doing in the next 2 weeks? So really, what is your exact next step? But this gets connected to your larger strategy, which we call the impact strategy, which really links to your mission. So here's what you need to know. Our impact strategy is about our goals. Now, you might have heard of SMART goals. You might have some goals in a strategic plan. You can't get this right until you really understand that there are different types of goals. Your mission is a goal, and your strategy actually would start, if I just put your mission right here, the rest of your strategy would flow off your mission. From there, this is where we're going to talk about the different types of goals first. We have impact goals. Impact goals are things that you want somebody to do, an action you want them to take. But you don't actually have control. You can't actually make somebody do something. So we're going to write out whatever goals we have. We want people to show up at a meeting. We want people to enroll in a program. Those would be impact goals. The next piece is perception goals. These are things that we want people to think or feel. Again, these are outcomes we don't have any control over. And then the third type of goal is what I call an execution goal. An execution goal is exactly what are other people having? Okay, I'll go through the questions. Hopefully sound is back. An execution goal, these are the things that we can set as goals for ourselves that we do have control over. So it becomes an action that we can take, and the reaction is either we impact the way what somebody does, or we impact the way they think or feel. So here's a simple example, but I want people to show up at a meeting. I am going to provide free food and tell everybody there's free food. Classic execution goal, provide free food to have the outcome of have people show up at the meeting. Oftentimes, especially in human service organizations, in order to have an impact, in order to affect the way somebody acts, we need to change the way they think or feel. So sometimes we have a chain of goals. I want people to show up at my meeting. People won't show up unless they believe that they're going to feel safe at the meeting. This is so true for support groups. And then, so what do I need to do to make people feel safe? And then what other steps do I need to do that will directly influence them to come to the meeting, often around reducing barriers. So whenever you get a perception goal, you have a big clue about what the execution goal is going to be, because there are only a few disciplines that are really focused on changing the way people think and feel. One of them is therapy, but you're probably, you may do therapy as part of your services. Another one is, the arts. The arts are all about impacting the way people think and feel. And a third is branding. Branding is the work of influencing how people perceive something. And so if you find yourself writing down a perception goal, a good chance is you're going to set some clear goals around branding for your activities, for your organization, or for a specific program. There are a few other elements I'm going to mention here that are in the worksheets that I'm going to provide you. When we set one of these goals, we want to prioritize it. It's so important that you identify the priority of that goal, because at some point, if you lose a piece of funding or something changes, you can quickly adjust so that you know to keep doing those things that are critically important and downshift those things that are just of normal importance. Also, you'll see on the worksheet, if you find a goal that is of low importance, you need to just remove that from your strategy, from your daily activities, because we don't need to be working on low importance activities. So that's key there. So you'll see there we have kind of worksheets that help you flesh out each part of a goal, knowing that someone needs to be accountable. Someone needs to own each goal to make sure it moves forward. And then we have something we call a critical success factor, or how will you define success for this goal? Some goals have a clear number that you can associate with them. Other goals, you're just going to write benchmarks of getting there. Or sometimes you need 2 or 3 measurements that tell you whether or not you're on the right track. So much of the work we do at nonprofits is hard to measure. I don't have time to talk about that today. But that is something we work on a lot at PivotGround, is working with clients to understand how to meaningfully measure what they're doing so they can make better decisions. So as I said, I have a download that you're all going to have access to that's going to help you spell out how to kind of write up each of these goals. So you'll have access to that. So we're going to have our mission. We're going to write out an impact goal. Let me just put the mission in here. I'll put it as a little circle here for our mission. So you're literally going to pull out a mind map tool, or you can do this on a giant whiteboard. And on that tool, you're going to say, okay, here's our mission. What are the core goals that we need to do to achieve our mission? The initial ones will probably be impact goals. Sometimes they're perception goals. If you are an advocacy organization, you'll have mostly be leading with perception goals. Other service-based organizations tend to be mostly impact first, and then you're going to build a tree. So impact, execution, or sometimes it might be impact, perception, execution. You'll use these documents to fill out the worksheets that we're providing. To fill out those goals. And literally, I want everything to be connected with a line from your mission to each goal. So you now know that this action you're taking here is designed to have this reaction. Let me see if I can make a line between it. There we go. Which is designed to impact your mission. From there, once you reach an execution goal, you're at the end of that line of your tree. And inside that execution goal, you're going to list the actions that you're going to take. Now, we use a digital tool at PivotGround that helps us kind of not have to rewrite things. But if you do this on paper and in the worksheets we provided, you're going to list the main actions you're going to take to achieve this execution goal. And then you're going to rewrite those actions and organize them by sprint 1, sprint 2, sprint 3, and sprint 4. And within each action, you will add your kind of micro set of to-dos. So these tend to be bigger things. So an action set might be, build out a social media marketing campaign, to achieve something. And so, sorry about that. So that will be this action set, and you'll have the list of to-dos that you'll need to do in order to accomplish that. And that way you use your CAP pretty much daily. We actually like to transfer some of our to-dos into our own to-do lists, and then we're definitely looking at our CAP though, definitely every 2 weeks to see if we're on track or off track, if we need to update anything. So again, I know some visuals will help, and we're providing those in the download because I don't have time to go into everything that you need to do in order to build out an impact strategy and a CAP, but we have provided that in the download. So I want to say that this document then is not something you're going to put on a shelf. It's always a work in progress, but because it's laid out visually, you can share this and quickly bring your board on board with what you're doing. You can bring a new team member on board with what you're doing. You can share this with a major donor so that they can see what you're working on. And this becomes not just a tool for knowing what step you're going to take, but a tool for communicating where you are going with your entire team or constituent base. I'll give you one. I do have time for kind of maybe another example of these different types of goals. So you may have an impact goal, which is to grow and maintain enrollment in a mentorship program. That might require that you achieve a perception goal of potential participants need to believe that they'll feel safe and welcome in the mentorship program. And so that might lead to an execution goal of craft key messaging that will probably would have an action set, something like work with a branding expert to craft key messaging, and the subtasks would include hire the branding expert, set the budget, ensure key messaging gets delivered to whoever is accountable in for marketing that program. If there's more time after questions, I'm happy to give some more examples. So if you just go back for a minute to the story I told you earlier, I had this moment of filling out my work availability and my time with my son and where I was trying to go. At the time, I was living in a friend's house, and I was sitting at this tiny desk in their attic where I had made a makeshift office for myself. I had gotten the intention part, and I had gotten the iteration part, but I hadn't gotten specific enough until that moment to really move the needle. And it was really being specific and sticking to a framework that moved me forward and continues to move us and our clients forward every day. We have such clarity about where we are going. We have such clarity around how fast we can move, and we don't get overloaded. When you get overloaded, you slow down. So we are hyper specific about what we want to accomplish. And this is one of the best ways to get started, right? So this is cyclical, but you have to start somewhere. So I think, sometimes it helps people to optimize their capacity first if they're really stuck. But for most people, starting with getting really specific about where you need to go, which means starting with the strategy, and don't get overwhelmed with making a huge strategy that extends on and on. Just focus first on what you need to accomplish in the next 60 days. And I promise you, if you download the worksheets, set just one impact goal related to your mission, write the corresponding execution goals, or if there's a sub-perception goal, take that through until you have the execution goal. And then if you implement your action sets with intention for just one impact goal, I promise you, you will achieve a win for your organization, and it's probably going to surprise you how big that win will be. So let me just move over here. I just want to make sure you have the link to get the resource that I mentioned. If you go to pivotground.com/nonprofit hub, this is the first time we've ever made this available totally for free. So you can go there. You're also welcome to email me. That's my personal direct email address, sarah@pivotground.com. And now I will do my best to answer some questions. I know there are a lot that have come in. So let me just make this window a little better so I can read them. Okay, I'm going to start at the, here we go. Do I have an example of what we're talking about with organized strategy slide? So yes, in this download here, we have the example. So, and we made it into a worksheet to really get you started. Operations functioning does not address strategic planning that involves the board, staff, stakeholders, and consumers. That's what you're hoping for. So here's the thing about the way we have to move very quickly, is that the old model of strategic planning that really involves the primary bulk of that planning to be at the board level and talking to stakeholders and consumers, that comes from a time when data was hard to gather. And then once we gathered that data, we could make a plan off of it and expect it to kind of be durable for, for months or years into the future, Two things have changed there. The data is now very easy to capture. We can know how, not just what our consumers or stakeholders are saying, right? When we survey people, they might tell us one thing, but oftentimes what people say they want and what they actually do are different. So now we can get that data continuously. We don't have to stop and collect it. And that data can tell us what people actually are doing, not just what they say they're going to do. So we no longer need to stop and spend a long time collecting data. And we shouldn't stop and spend a long time collecting data because that data isn't going to be good for very long. Collect it ongoing. We need to look at it continuously and adapt to it right away and be ready for it to change. So what does that mean? And this is big. It means the bulk of your strategic planning piece needs to shift into your executive director and the leadership team running the organization day to day, because your entire strategy and ability to execute that strategy needs to move much faster. And the board's role is going to be more focused on oversight of, is there a strategy? Is it being monitored? Is it being implemented? And less about what exactly is that strategy. And I know that that is a big change for a lot of organizations. I don't know how to unmute participants. I'm sorry. Okay, where were we? Sound, hopefully the sound came back. What digital tool do we use? We use a tool called ZenKit. It's similar in some ways to Trello or Airtable. All of those are good tools. ZenKit has its positives and negatives. It is a new tool, but is the only tool I know that combines mind mapping with what are called Kanban style boards, which is when you just have rows, columns, and you can shift things from one column to another. So it's definitely worth looking up ZenKit, Z-E-N-K-I-T. Do we have a sample impact method plan that we can send you? So I think we do. We'll try to put, we have a video going through an impact strategy that I think we can link on this resources page. It might take us till the end of the day to put it up. So if you don't see it today, check back tomorrow and we can put a link to that. What if the action plan recommends hiring more staff since the current resources cannot handle going forward? When is budget implications discussed during the process? That's a really great question. So you should be looking at, so it's a multi-part answer. One of the ways that we leverage data often is by creating a dashboard of the key numbers. And I'm not talking about a fancy dashboard. It can be as simple as an Excel spreadsheet or a Google Sheet spreadsheet with the key numbers that you need to look at in your organization weekly, or at the very least every 2 weeks during those sprint planning meetings, we look at the data. That goes back to what I was saying before, we're always looking at the data now. So every 2 weeks, definitely look at the resources. So if you need to hire more staff, I mean, it's hard to tell without knowing your organization. I encourage you, if this is your problem, to schedule a call with me. We can go through that. You might want to optimize your capacity first with your existing capacity to make sure that you can actually handle what you need to do with your current staff. The next thing to do is if you create that blueprint and then you plan adding people to fulfill those functions in the blueprint into your strategy, you pull in some metrics, and we have a way of putting metrics in the blueprint as well as in our goals. You can make a great argument to a funder of why you might need an initial amount of money to get a position started. So it really depends. If you really can't move forward, you are over capacity. You should always have enough capacity to grow to your next level. So that means you probably need to kind of figure out a way to step back a little so you have enough extra capacity to do what it takes to scale. And I'm saying scale instead of grow because that's what we really want to do. We want to scale. We want to be able to continually have an exponentially larger impact. How are we on time? Okay, we have 1 more minute. Can this be used as a starting point when starting your own consulting business? What if you're a one-man show getting started? We have had so many nonprofit consultants ask us about learning how to use the impact method for their own clients. Right now, it's only available for nonprofits directly, but we are going to start a training program so that we can certify other consultants in how to do the impact method with other nonprofits, if that's your question. We run on it, even though PivotGround is not a nonprofit, we run on the impact method and it works very well. I would really recommend it kind of to any business, especially a smaller business who wants to get really focused about growth if you're kind of mission oriented. Okay, thank you, Gary. I appreciate that. That is all I have for everybody today.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Sarah. That was very informative. I appreciate you spending your time with us today so that our listeners can be smarter about doing their strategic planning.
Thank you, everybody, and feel free to reach out if you have any questions.
Great. Thanks so much, everyone. Now go out and do good.